from Atlanta.
Okay, so looks like we're getting a little stable there, attendees. So hello and welcome everyone. I am Kristen LeBlanc. I am the Executive Director of ATAP, the Association of Talent Acquisition Professionals. We are so glad you could join us this morning for this amazing webinar opportunity. I'm gonna kick it off to David, but first I just wanna let you know that if you have any questions or thoughts or comments or anything you wanna put in either the chat function or in the Q&A, go ahead and use either one. We'll be monitoring it and we will be stopping to have Q&A toward the end of the session. So we are sponsored by Armstrong Craven, which is we're very grateful for. So thank you to Armstrong Craven for their support of this live stream. And David Helfrich is the client partner / head of the Americas for Armstrong Craven. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to him to get us started. And David, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen, for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're super excited to be here today. I'm delighted to be joined by two experts in the field, two people who I have great respect for. And before we get into that, I am head of the Americas, client partner for Armstrong Craven. We are a global organization, and to put it in proper context for today's discussion, approximately 65 to 70% of the projects we're engaged in, whether it's an insight or a research project, an executive search or talent pipelining, has a diversity component to it. So even though this may be somewhat of an academic discussion today, in practice, diversity, equity, and inclusion is really at the forefront of the vast majority of businesses, nonprofits, and organizations that you'll see out there, which is encouraging. That's not to say that we still don't have a long way to go, which we'll get into today. So without further ado, I did want to introduce our panelists. First, we have Sue John, who is the principal of Diversity at Workplace Consulting Group, working with organizations to diversify their workforce and to create inclusive, equitable work environments through consultation and trainings. She also was the Vice President of Talent, Diversity, and Inclusion at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, where she led the enterprise diversity and inclusion, talent acquisition, performance management, and leadership development, along with the associate engagement teams. In addition to her expertise in DE&I and talent management, she has held leadership roles in IT, operations, marketing, sales, and call centers in various organizations and industries. Sue received her MBA from Suffolk University and her MS in nonprofit management from Northeastern University. Hi, Sue, how are you doing today?
Great, thank you. Delighted to join you.
Perfect. And secondarily, we have Greg Witz, who is the legal recruitment manager at Earth Justice, focusing on senior level lateral attorney recruitment, legal fellowships, legal clerkships, internships, and a variety of other roles. From 2011 to 2019, Greg worked as a legal recruiter at the Federal Trade Commission and their Bureau of Competition. In 2018, he received one of the FTC's highest honors, the A. Leon Higginbotham Jr. Award. This award recognizes supervisors, employees, or groups that have made outstanding contributions toward fostering equal employment opportunities. Prior to working at the FTC, Greg worked in professional development and recruitment at Arnold and Porter LLP's Washington, D.C. headquarters. Greg received his BA in journalism from Temple University. He lives in his hometown of Washington, D.C. with his wife, daughter, and their dog. Greg, how are you doing today? And what kind of dog is that, by the way? We're just curious over here.
The dog is a Chihuahua Pug mix. His name is Primo. He's not well behaved, but we love him anyway. Thank you for the great intro, and looking forward to a great conversation.
Wonderful. Yeah, we appreciate you both being here with us today. And listen, we kind of hope we can take the gloves off today, kind of move off the beaten path, because when you think about DE&I, it's an exhaustive subject, right? Everyone's talking about it. It's something that is at the forefront of everyone's mind. But I think few discussions go into really an authentic conversation to really give a no-frills interaction of what DE&I means outside of some of the preconceived notions that we all hear about. So I want to welcome you both and also say that this is an open forum to really challenge people's ideas on this as well, to push the envelope. And our goal is to have a really progressive conversation that helps people think about DE&I in sort of a new way. that hopefully fosters creativity and an open-mindedness to leave people with something different. So to start, I mean, I wanted to ask, why is this such an important topic, right? Because, we hear people sometimes make a business case for DE&I, right? I've heard many people say, oh, well, listen, the more diverse an organization is, the more profitable it is. However, is this the right framing? Why would we look at DE&I as sort of a business profitability utility as opposed to sort of a moral imperative? What do you think the right way to view DE&I is? Is it comprehensive? Is it first and foremost a moral imperative as a humanity and as a society? Or do you also give credence to those who would make a business case for it? I'll open that up to both of you. Sue, you can start, please.
Absolutely. Again, I'm Sue. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm really happy to join you all today. So David, my first response to that question would be all of the above. All of the above. I don't think we need to spend any more time debating even about what the rationale is. I'm hoping in the year 2021, we're done with having to get permission to do this work, or having to justify this work, or convince organizations and senior leaders to do this work. Because let's face it, if we know there is racism, sexism, genderism, ableism, etc. in society, we have to assume there is racism, sexism, genderism, ableism, etc. in organizations. People don't come through an organization's door and completely leave everything behind. I know in a way we sort of looked at that, maybe 10 years ago, that you separate work and home, but we all know that it's blurred. It's the same, it's people who are function in society also function in organizations. So we have to assume if we see the events that is unfolding and highlighting things that have been in our country for hundreds of years, we have to assume that it's in our organization. And for those organizations who say, well, I only want to focus on business, well, diversity, equity, inclusion helps with business. There's a direct correlation between financial performance, innovation, decision-making, war on talent, all of that. So, and for those who sort of have an individual commitment to do this work, it's applicable to that as well. So I would say all of the above. Let's stop debating the reasons why, and let's just get to making an impact.
Very well said. Greg, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with Sue. I think, business case is like long settled. I think we can all agree on that. I think, from my perspective, I think I work in a pretty unique environment so I work for Earth Justice, which is the premier environmental nonprofit law firm. And when you think about environmental issues, typically, the communities that are suffering when there are environmental problems are communities of color, they're tribal and indigenous peoples. They are generally people who've been underserved and in some cases rendered voiceless. And we work in partnership and on behalf of these people. So for us, being able to work across cultures and in partnership with different groups of people, I mean, it's a very real part of the business, and that's why. And we're a nonprofit, right? The other thing about Earth Justice I think is unique is that we are always representing others. You'll never see in a case Earth Justice versus so-and-so. It's always us working in partnership, representing other people. And so in order to represent other people, in order to represent people who may be from different cultures, experiencing different things, and we're not only represent, but work in partnership with them. These are communities who know more about what's going on than we do. So in many cases, they are leading the charge and we're working in partnership with them. We have to be culturally competent. And so it's much more explicit in this organization, but still, if you are in a corporate profit-driven environment, it doesn't really change, right? If you want to make money, and we talk about structural issues as they relate to racism, sexism, all of these issues that if we can come together and agree that these issues exist in our society, that's going to be reflected in commerce and business. And in order to be the best business that you can be in order to create the environment where you can represent and make money for your stakeholders. You have to keep in mind the people, the human beings that are involved, both from a customer perspective to internally how you're going to work as a team to reach all of these goals. So it doesn't really matter whether you're in an NGO, whether you're in a corporate environment, whether you're in a state or federal government. It's still vitally important, and it's not. I think people have long looked at it as sort of a squishy kind of kumbaya thing, but it really is a factor in succeeding in no matter what business environment you happen to be in.
Very well said. Fascinating comments. To that, I'd like to segue into a different question for you, because in the United States, certainly, I think we all remember, we're all probably young enough and old enough to remember the turn of the century around 2000, when I think there was sort of this optimistic attitude that we were kind of moving towards a post-racial, a post-sexist society. I think people got a sober awakening that wasn't the case. We still have a lot of these structural problems in the United States. And I'm curious, from your perspective, outside of your professional capacities, both of you, do you see racism, sexism, ableism, and genderism in general society? And do those experiences reflect what you experience in the workplace? In other words, when you experience that in our general society, do those same challenges exist in the workplace? Is it less challenging, more challenging? I'd be curious to hear both of your perspectives on that. And Greg, if you could start it off, please do.
Well, I think, at Earth Justice, these issues are very front of mind. I think particularly when you're talking about, environmental issues that people are dealing with, clean water, food that is free of pesticides and poisons, clean air, they intersect with so many of these other issues, right? They don't put coal-fired power plants or bus depots typically in areas that are people by rich people that are not homogenous. Typically, these things that cause these health issues end up a lot of times in Black and brown neighborhoods. So it intersects with a lot of social justice issues, housing justice issues. And that's something when we're doing our work, we have to think about environmental justice and environmental racism as a real issue to deal with as we try to, litigate cases and push policy forward. So that, I think, externally, that's something we have to think about. Internally, we work in a team environment for the most part, right? That's something that we're evaluating candidates on all the time. How you work well with others, how you work across different departments. We're primarily a legal organization, but we're 100% donor-funded nonprofit, so we have a really robust development team. We have a really robust communications team, HR, operations, IT, all of this infrastructure to help us do this work. And we have to work together with one another. And that means that, again, you're working across cultures. You're working, our team happens to be very, very diverse. And so we have to think about not only diversity, equity, inclusion as we try to do the work of the organization, but also as we try to figure out how to do that work together. And so to answer your question, the short version is yes, these are things that I'm thinking about every day as an employee, particularly as a talent acquisition professional, and making sure that our processes are as inclusive as possible, as that our job ads are using language that are not excluding people subconsciously or consciously, that we're thinking about, who are going to be on our hiring panels when folks are coming in for interviews, all of these things, even when candidates are trying to apply. if a candidate has a visual impairment? Is our applicant tracking system going to be usable for that candidate, or are we thinking about all of these things as we try to do our jobs, both internally and both externally? So these are things that really come to the forefront, and again, they're really, really important. These are things that we need to do our jobs. These are not things that we say to feel better or to look good. We cannot do the job without really, really wrestling with and reckoning with these issues and thinking about ways to approach them differently going forward.
Fascinating, yeah. And Sue, please, yes.
I second everything Greg said. I'm actually going to get to answer another angle of your question, David. I'll speak for myself because you talked about personal experience. So I'll speak for myself. Being female and being a person of color and being an immigrant, I will share some of my experiences and how that relates to being a professional of color, female professional of color in the workplace as well. So I would say, first thing I want to say, not seeing representation is very, very painful. And, you know, when I was a child, there was, I'll just, again, like I said, I'll speak for myself. When I was a child, I was desperate looking for a doll that looked like me. There wasn't any. There was no Asian dolls, and never mind that, there was no dolls that had black hair. So I remember being 9 years old, bought a dark brown-haired doll, and painstakingly with a Sharpie, I covered each hair strand. Now, I didn't do DE&I as a living when I was 9, but as a 9-year-old kid, I instinctively knew I needed something to represent me because I wasn't seeing it in books, I wasn't seeing it in TV, I wasn't seeing it anywhere around me. And so not having representation is inherently and humanely and instinctively painful. And then the second thing I would say is even now, as I'm now a grown-up, everywhere I go, I can't help but clock who else in the room looks like me. Rather it's a business meeting, rather it's a restaurant, rather it's an amusement park, right? Even at concerts, even at Broadway shows, wherever I go, subway, bus, I instinctively clock who else looks like me. And if I don't see many people who look like me, I feel unsafe and I don't feel relaxed. And that's just how it is. And that is also very painful. And unless you sort of know what that feels like, you don't know the pain of that. The other thing I would share is I have children and I'm talking to them about fairness and meritocracy, work hard, study hard. And I also have to balance that with the reality of society. So I have to balance that work hard, study hard, yes, but also be aware of systemic isms. And that conversation is also very difficult. And you have to know that meritocracy is true, but at the same time, meritocracy is not true and it's a myth. And then on top of that, you know, one of the other things is I have a child who has autism, and painfully being aware that the school system is very much based on teaching sort of a common denominator, a generic child, if you will, and is not capable of adapting to anyone who learns differently, reacts differently, doesn't, you know, understand authority, social skills, all of that. It's just not designed for that. And so if you put all that together from my personal experience and you bring it to work, this is what we address on diversity and inclusion on a day-to-day basis with our clients is, you know, yes, work hard, study hard, have a lot of degrees, but also realize there are barriers that are systemic that has nothing to do with you as an individual. Yes, you know, we tell people to speak up, but if you're in a room where you don't feel safe or comfortable, your ability to speak up is very limited. And then you couple that with, whoa, you know, yes, I'm bright and equipped and talented, but at the same time, how much of myself do I bring? How authentic should I be? That lack of representation is also painful. It makes you second guess everything, which then makes you hesitate. And people wonder, well, you're bright. Why aren't you saying more, volunteering more, and so forth? So everything you experience as an individual, you bring into the organization. So David, to your question, yes, there is some separation. I am, in essence, a different person when I come to work than when I'm at home. But how much of that difference has to be is where that burden and imposter syndrome, all of that comes. And so, you know, every organization says, speak up, be authentic, we value diversity, but really what they're saying is, we want someone who's diverse, but who acts, walks, talks just like us. And then it becomes very, very difficult.
Very interesting. And it actually just came to mind, Sue, what you just said is a segue to the next question, which is the challenges in hiring what we consider diverse candidates who may come from the same elite institutions, or actually may come from some of the same philosophical backgrounds. And what I mean by that is, to use an example, if you look at our Supreme Court in the United States, right? If you look at it, it's pretty diverse. I mean, there's a lot of people from different backgrounds represented, yet they all graduated from either Yale or Harvard Law School, and they're all essentially former prosecutors. So I wonder if we're really getting sort of the rainbow bridge of true diversity, if we're just sort of recruiting people from those same elite institutions. I'd be curious from both of your perspectives. You know, Greg, oftentimes we see in AmLaw 100 firms, they kind of do the same thing, right? When it comes to their diversity recruiting, typically they'll first go to the Ivy League law schools as opposed to maybe broadening their scope and looking at people from different backgrounds. And Sue, I'm curious from your experience at Blue Cross Blue Shield and some of these blue chip organizations, if you witness the same thing, or have you witnessed that organizations, nonprofits and firms are actually evolving beyond that to sort of broaden their scope? Greg, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So having worked at one of the aforementioned AM 100 law firms, and then having worked at a mid-sized federal government agency, and now working at a steadily growing nonprofit, I've seen this evolve quite a bit. I would say that yes, there's particularly in legal recruitment, there's been a history of employers kind of fixating on these same law schools, right? And I think, especially in recent years, particularly in the last 5 years, I think you're starting to see a little more movement from employers in being more open-minded about the sources from which their candidates are coming. I think for the reasons that I think you're alluding to, David, that even if you get candidates who have diverse profiles from the same school, you are still potentially getting a homogenous group of candidates in terms of their thinking, certainly in the way they've been educated. And so I think that more employers are starting to seek out different sources and seek out different students, particularly, for us, right? If we're doing legal recruitment, of all of the historically Black colleges and universities, only 6 have law schools, right? That's Howard Law School, FAMU, Texas Southern, UDC, what am I missing? NC, I think, in North Carolina Central.
Yes.
And then Southern University. And so you're talking about, 6 law schools that are either two of them in Washington, D.C., and the rest of them are in the South. And that's a region of the country, I think, that law firms, certainly the white shoe law firms that we're thinking about, haven't spent a lot of time in terms of doing outreach and connecting with people down there. And I think they're missing out on an opportunity to interact with students and potential candidates who bring a wealth of different experiences that will really transform how they approach the work at their firms, at their even if you're hiring for in-house or things of that nature. I do think we're getting better, but I do think it's an uphill battle, particularly with some hiring managers, particularly with some managing partners who've been doing things the same way for a very long time, and to their minds have been successful, I think in some ways, but I think, in terms of how the world is changing, I think they're really, really missing out on opportunities to become a much more impactful firm or corporation or nonprofit by being a lot more open-minded in terms of the sources from which they're finding candidates. And I think it's changing. It's certainly changing at my organization, but it's changing very, very slowly. And I think, more conversations like this are needed to help really cement with the hiring managers and leaders. And it really, it always comes down to leadership. Help them to understand why it's so important that we're really, really broadening our view in terms of where we're finding candidates.
Fascinating. What are your thoughts, Sue? Please.
I was just going to say, progress is absolutely being made, but it's happening at a very painful pace. According to 2 recent studies, I think women, if we were to just talk gender and race for a moment, I think women, even with all the women in the pipeline, it's going to take 100 years to parity in the C-suite. So even if diversity, even in law firms, you have a lot of diversity in the entry level, but as you go up into partners, it becomes smaller and smaller. And you could say that about healthcare, you could say that about the music industry, you could take about nonprofits, you could say that about retail, just about any industry. If there is some diversity, it's in the entry level, some in middle management, but then really very little in board chairs and in CEOs. In fact, I'm sure you all know, we all laugh, but we also have to understand from the statistic, I believe there is more CEOs named James and Michael than there are all women CEOs combined. There are more board chairs named John than there are all women board chairs. And we laugh at this, but it's still, and you talk about the progression of the Supreme Court. Yes, it is very diverse, but not too long ago, it wasn't at all. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously said, when will she stop fighting for gender rights in the Supreme Court? And she said, when we have 9 women Supreme Court justices. And people were like, what, 9 women? And she's like, for hundreds of years, we had 9 men. No one squawked at that. And this whole feeling, if we just have one of each, we're diverse. And that is, of course, not true, right? We seem to be okay with, just having one of each and having some tokenism. We have a person of color on our board. We have a woman and senior. We have a person who's part of the LGBT community. We're fine. And that kind of settling for just a few is I think what is contributing to the slowness of the progress that's being made. And then the other part is, I'm sure we have a lot of recruiters, a lot of talent acquisition folks in the audience, which is, hiring managers are like, yes, give me a diverse pool of talent, if they even ask, but they usually ask, and let's say at the beginning, and then they always hire the person that they're familiar with. Oh, David is tried and true. Greg is tried and true. Sarah is tried and true. Chris is tried and true. I know them from my network, so it's a sort of a safer bet to go with that. Or the filter. So if you think about it, we use the same filter to filter diverse pool of talent, and you could, and that just tells you the outcome will then still be the same, right? Because things like executive presence, the communication skills. For a moment, I'm just going to put education and big name, previous company experiences to aside for a moment. Just looking at our criteria we use the same filter to filter diverse talent. And then we say, well, if we have to adjust the filter, are we lowering our standards? And you're like, no, you just need a different filter because your talent pool is different. You can't So to my earlier comment about we say we want diverse talent, but we want someone who walks and talks and acts and runs meetings just like us. That's literally what I mean, is you have to use a different set of filters if you're going to have a different set of talent. And then on top of that, once a few slips through, rarely do they get promoted because we look at leadership through a certain lens of leaders that we've had in the past and we currently have. And so, you know, what you're left with is if you work hard and get a diverse pool of talent, chances of them making it to the finalist round is slim. And even when they make it to the finalist round, the hiring manager usually ends up hiring based on who they feel most comfortable with. And then on top of that, if the few that gets through and gets hired, the promotional path is also to the point where we use, you know, certain criteria for leadership, and them making it to higher levels of the organization is also very slim. And then organizations get exhausted and they say, you know, it's not working out. This is very painful. This is just what the output has yielded, you know, such small results. What's going on? And they're forgetting that they have to fundamentally change the way we look at talent. Because here's what happens, you know, I always say diversity inclusion is like, you know, diet and exercise, not because I want to minimize it, but because we all want to do the right thing. But when day-to-day thing happen, we just resort right back, right? We all make New Year's resolutions in January, and then we're like, oh, but for this birthday party, we're going to do this. Oh, I went grocery shopping and I shopped on the outside aisles and I got all this healthy food, but we're having mac and cheese again for dinner. So naturally, kale and spinach is going to rot in my, you know, my vegetable drawer in the refrigerator. So it's the fact that we all want to do the right thing and we all do it, but then we don't change our practices and our policies and the way we do things, which means all that hard work just sort of goes to waste.
Yeah, I really like that analogy of diet and exercise, because it's funny, but it also rings true in terms of, you know, the kind of day-to-day really discipline you have to have and constant mindfulness around the subject. Wonderful analogy. Also, I want to remind everyone who's tuning in, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in, because we are going to get to a Q&A. So if there's any kind of burning question you have on your mind for the panelists, please feel free to fire away. But I saw a really funny meme on LinkedIn around diversity hires and this whole term and the whole phraseology. And I wanted to discuss it with you both, because essentially this meme questioned this preconceived notion some people had. If they see a person of color, oh, they must be a diversity hire, right? And while simultaneously we don't question if a white guy named John gets hired, is he a homogeny hire? So the meme was the CEO John, and Sue, actually in the meme, the CEO's name was John. So John John hired Jay, another homogeny hire, right? And then they like roll their eyes. And it's funny because I wonder what it's going to take for us to get to a point where we normalize having a diverse workforce, meaning where we don't even question anymore whether somebody is there because, you know, they deserve to be there, they're there because of meritocracy or other reasons. And I think it's funny that we never question whether somebody's in that position because of longstanding privilege or longstanding relationships they have, or just because they come from a sort of background that the hiring manager is more familiar and comfortable with, right? So I'm curious from your perspectives, how are we going to abolish these preconceived notions that are erroneous about diversity hires every time they see somebody, a person of color, who joins an organization? Sue, you want to start?
Sure. I think the quick answer is when we have critical mass.
Yeah.
And the long answer is it's going to take deliberative hard work to get to critical mass. Our human brain, studies show, is that our brains are wired to notice of difference quicker. We are also programmed to notice negativity quicker than positivity. And so if you combine those two statistics together, we notice difference quicker and we notice negativity quicker. We always go, you know, that diversity hire we made, you know, remember we hired that director or that VP of color 2 years ago, it didn't work out so well. And I always kind of, people use that sometimes as a reason why, diversity hiring is hard. And I always go, what about the 10 others that you hired that didn't work out, right? And then also so many people are like, I don't want to, change our hiring criteria because it's so worked for us, tried and true. And I go, yes, so every person you've ever hired, you always been 100% satisfied with? Oh, no. Every person you've ever hired, you hope they never leave? No, exactly. It's not like the current hiring process has yielded 100% results for you. So, what we're saying is you got to change that, and you're not actually giving up a lot to change your hiring filtering process. So I would say the quick answer is once we get to critical mass, once we have, professional difference at every level and every, and it's not just represented by one, right? So if we have, critical mass of women, critical mass of people of the LGBT community, critical mass of non-binary genders, critical mass of professionals of color, and so on and so forth. I think at that point, hopefully we won't be questioning it, but it's going to take a while to get there. And what I'm really just pushing back on is making the assumption that diversity hire is unique and had a separate, and we had to lower our standards for that. And yet assuming that homogeneity hire, which we don't even notice, must have been based on meritocracy. And I also just want to kind of put a big bow around that whole statement, which is to say, and no organization and no individual is immune. When we talk about systemic isms, it includes all of us. Every single one of us. There is no nice person who's, who's immune to this. There's no progressive person there's nobody who marched in the 60s who feels that they're immune. We're all not immune. That's what definition of systemic barriers are. Systemic racism, systemic ableism, systemic genderism, systemic sexism, so on, systemic ageism, all of that. The systemic isms mean it's embedded into all of us. So for people to say, oh, we don't have that problem because we're a nonprofit. We don't have that problem because we're all nice. We don't have that problem because we're so collegial. We don't have that problem because we're so polite. That is not true. I'll leave it right there. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I think, the long term, it's going to take some pretty drastic changes to society. And I don't think any of us individually on this call are going to be able to make those changes. It's going to take some big collective changes on a societal, structural level. I think in the meantime, it takes continuous hard work. It will continue to be difficult. You're going to continue to have to contend with ignorance. You're going to have to contend with the concept that having diverse applicant pools and hiring candidates with from diverse profiles is equated to lowering your standards. We're gonna have to continue to contend with all of this, but it's going to take continuous pressure, particularly for those of us who work in talent acquisition, for those of us who are doing diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work, to not let up, and to not only not let up, but to continue to recruit more people to the cause in all of our organizations. We've already proven over decades now that you'll make more money. So that again, we talk about business case, that I think those facts are settled. Now it's going to take, I think we have to focus more on how it changes, how agile we can be as organizations, and how it can change how efficient we can be, how it changes the structure of what we do, how it improves our processes, how longer and more thoughtful processes up front will result in better hires that stay with our organizations longer, hires that perform better and that climb the ranks of our organizations. And there's like plenty of statistics to bear this out. But putting statistics in the face of leaders' gut feelings that's the fight. That's the fight. And so, and then the last part of it is frankly, new people in charge. People who continue to hold on to these antiquated notions have to go. I mean, at some point, we need those people out, and we need people who are really being thoughtful about what diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice means to their organizations, to themselves personally, to society as a whole. But again, it's going to take a long fight, and it's going to take constant pressure. And that's, that's how I'm going to approach it going forward.
Absolutely. If I could just add to that, 100% agree with Greg. And I would also like to add the fact that at the same time, this is not insurmountable. Just a few pebbles strategically placed in a creek will change the course of water. It doesn't have to be huge boulders and rocks. So it's a yes and. You need those, constant huge changes. And at the same time, I believe there is something that every single one of us on this call can do. If we all throw in a pebble, we can fundamentally change the course of this water.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now we're going to segue into some audience questions. We've got some live questions here, and I've got some questions as well that were delivered to me last week, anticipating this webinar. One is actually in line with what we've been discussing this past week, the three of us, in terms of the challenges of hiring diverse candidates in niche subject areas. So a question from Justin is, do you have advice for more problematic skill sets, talent pools? We have a full software team, and software engineering has a built-in issue regarding hiring diverse candidates because of the existing talent pool. We see no qualitative difference in candidates being able to make it through our hiring process based on background, but the starting pool is the main barrier. And this is an interesting question because I've actually seen this in my day-to-day life in terms of the challenges of hiring diverse talent in tech, particularly within software engineering as well. I know some interesting clients I've talked to have actually started to home grow their talent, meaning they'll start recruiting diverse talents directly from the university and have them sort of grow within the organization to become those senior level engineers that they're looking for. But I'm curious for both you, Sue and Greg, in terms of, are there any areas that you've experienced where there seems to be a lack of diverse talent just because of the subject matter? Because I've seen in software engineering, for example, it's pretty much dominated by middle-aged white men, right? So have you seen that? And I'd be curious, and it sounds like Justin is curious too, what solutions have you seen to be effective in addressing that?
So, in the legal field, I've encountered this myself. So prior to working there at Justice, I was working at the Bureau of Competition in the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau of Competition. And so I was hiring antitrust attorneys. And, that is an area of practice of the law that's kind of hot now. But I think when I first started, it was one that I spent a lot of time on law school campuses sort of explaining the basics. And I think, it was a two-part solution to in terms of improving the diversity of our applicant pools at that time. Was one, starting really early and being proactive on reaching out to like first-year law students. And in some cases, if there were opportunities to do so, reaching out to high school students, and one, just like explaining what it is that we do, why it's important, and why it's a path that could be right for them. The next part of it, I think, is working with hiring managers to be much more open-minded, again, about what constitutes the requisite experience for that particular role. There is like sort of an ideal antitrust attorney who has an undergraduate degree in economics and, went to one of these law schools that has one of the preeminent antitrust professors there. And that's a path that's easy to see. Same thing currently in environmental law. We do impact environmental litigation, and there's a path where you go to, certain law schools and you study environmental science in undergrad, and it kind of makes sense very easily for a recruiter to look at that resume and say, okay, I get it. But I think if you think a lot more broadly about the types of candidates and the type of skills that they bring to the table, I think you'll start to see a lot more diversity in your applicant pool. So currently, if you think about environmental impact litigation, what's to say that somebody who has been doing civil rights impact litigation or housing litigation or litigation in any number of other contexts, what's to say that that skill set can't be transferable to the work that we currently do at our organization, right? I think generally, if you find people that are smart, thoughtful, can write, and have sort of the baseline skills, you can teach them new legal statutes. Now, how does that transfer to tech? I imagine it's slightly different, right? You know, there are certain things that you have to know in order to be a programmer or you know, take on specific roles. So I think the first part in starting early and starting pipelines as early as you possibly can and being proactive in terms of your outreach, both, you know, certainly in cities and locations where your company has high visibility, and taking the time to really like go out and sort of tell the good news of your company to very, very early potential applicants, I think is really helpful. And I think, you know, in terms of, you know, building up your pipeline internally and as David alluded to with one of his colleagues, starting to really devote a lot of time and resources to professional development for early career professionals, I think is going to be really, really helpful in that regard. So one, just being more open-minded about the sources of the candidates and the skill sets that are transferable, being, you know, very open-minded about those candidates and giving them the opportunity to prove you wrong in some cases. And then two, devoting the time, the effort, and the resources to professional development whenever possible, particularly for your very early professionals, I think will also help.
I think Greg hit on all the major points. I will add, translate that open-mindedness into actual action. So make it so that your job description is as open as possible. Ask yourself, what is the minimum criteria that you need so that you just have a more open pool to begin with, as opposed to describing someone who just left, right? You know, that person didn't start with 20 years of experience, but yet you're describing that person in your job description. So ask yourself, for the job that is today and what you want in the future, does it need 5 years of maximum experience, you know, minimum experience? Does it need an undergraduate degree? Does it need, so really make your job description so that you're defining the minimum threshold, as opposed to changing your threshold later in the process. So that's one. Translate your open-mindedness into open processes. The second part is, I am not aware of any industry that is not struggling with diversity. Every client we've ever worked with in the music industry, we have such a lack of diversity. Law, tech, our tech industry, our healthcare, all of that. And yes, retail and healthcare sometimes has, you know, sometimes gender and racial diversity, but again, in the entry level roles. So I have yet to meet an industry that says we have no problem with diversity. Every industry tells me they uniquely have difficulties with diversity. So just know that you're in good company. But you know what? We're not going to settle for that. To hide behind the comfort that, hey, our industry has it already difficult is not an answer, right? And so you do have to do all those things that Greg talked about. And then I will also say this, for every organization that tells me they can't find diverse talent, there are 10 diverse talent who tells me they can't find opportunities. So there's a math going awry somewhere, which means we may literally be not functioning in the same network groups. We literally could be missing each other. And we know from, from statistics, David, you asked about society versus organizations. We know statistically, we hang out with people who are similar to us. I think the latest stats showed that 90% of white Caucasians hang out with other white Caucasians, about 80% of Black African Americans hang out with other Black African Americans, and so on. And so naturally, our networks are not overlapping. So our governor in Massachusetts said, when he first became governor, he said, my administration will never be diverse if I only hire within my network. So really have to look outside your network to find diverse talent, because we are unintentionally, but comfortably living within and interacting with people who are like us, and thus not seeing diversity. So if we could continue to look outside our networks, there's great place to start is historically Black colleges and universities that we mentioned earlier, but there's a professional organization for everything. There's a professional organization of Black engineers. There's organization of Asian American lawyers. There's an organization of women in sales. There's an organization of LGBT leaders. So there's an organization for just about everything. And just do a little bit of Google work. Robin DiAngelo, at the end of her book, Nice Racism, says, I have a tip for you. Google it. And you will find an organization that you will be able to help you find, diverse talent.
And I just want to reiterate one more point that Sue made earlier, because it's really, really important. It's worth saying again. Really drill down on what a need to have is versus a nice to have. And like really, really, really ask yourself if you're hanging on to something that's merely a nice to have, because so many of our job advertisements are seeking these unicorn candidates. They're frankly don't exist, or if they do exist, they already have a high paying job. And so, really, really drill down on that and try not to hang on to too many of those nice to haves. And I think you'll have a much, much better time in terms of having diverse applicant pools. And then again, take that open-mindedness throughout the whole process. Now you have a diverse applicant pool. Make sure that the hiring panel also is diverse as possible. At some point your organization may not be where it needs to be yet, but keep that in mind. And then finally, be evaluating candidates on cultural competency, on emotional intelligence. These are all of the things that you need. So even if early on, if you're very early in this process, and I like to hope that you aren't, but if you are, even if you aren't hiring as many candidates from diverse backgrounds, you are at least hiring candidates who have some cultural competency and emotional intelligence in addition to functional skills. So as you continue along this path, you can be better at hiring candidates from diverse backgrounds and get the ball rolling in the right direction.
Absolutely. And just to underline that even more, don't be so worried about letting go of these criteria, as Greg said, because you know what? I've seen plenty of hiring managers that don't even hire on that anyway. Can I just tell you how many finalists was hired based on, he's a great guy. I'm like, I didn't know that was a criteria. Or he has a great sense of humor. And I'm like, I didn't know that was a criteria. And so the final hire usually ends up having nothing to do with the criteria anyway. So don't be so concerned about letting some of those go in the beginning.
100%. I mean, really important points. I'm glad you reiterated both of those points. We do have another question from Tanya, who says, our company is a nonprofit in energy utilities, and we began our DEI initiative in mid-2020, so very recently, and it was officially approved by the board for BRG with regards to Black leaders. However, our dilemma is with the definition of allyship. What would you recommend, especially in terms of defining inclusion? I think that means in terms of defining inclusion in terms of allyship. Tanya, if you want to restate that, I don't know if that question is clear, but maybe it is. But let me also bundle that with a question we got from a different guest who also asked, what do you believe an organization's or a company's obligation to issue solidarity statements for social movements like BLM or Stop Asian Hate or No DAPL, No Dakota Pipeline? Maybe we could talk about that in the vein of allyship and what it means in the workplace. So I'm curious from your perspective, do you think it's the right place, or do you think it's an obligation of a company or an organization to issue such solidarity statements with particular social movements? Either one of you can start with that.
I mean, I'm less interested in solidarity statements if the company's not going to do anything. So, Yeah, I mean, I think solidarity statements are important and fine as long as they are paired with action, right? If you look particularly, over last summer, so many corporations, put black boxes on their social media feeds, and they set aside all of these millions of dollars that they were planning to distribute to different communities that have been harmed, and that money has not yet been distributed. And these companies continue to donate money to campaigns that frankly work directly against the same people they purported to be in solidarity with. So those statements are fine as long as they are paired with action. In terms of allyship, I guess is the question, how do we define allyship? Or
So yeah, actually we got some clarification. Tanya, thank you for clarifying. She says, our members include allies. However, we would like to determine the role in the BRG, for example, rights to voting or holding an office. And don't want to create reverse discrimination. I'm still not clear what the question is. Tanya, help us out here. Or maybe the question is clear to you both, but would you need further clarification on that?
I mean, I actually would, but Sue, if you have some thoughts, I'd love to let you go ahead.
Yeah, why don't we stick with for now the question of solidarity statements. Sue, if you have a view on that, because we are running out of time here.
Sure. So I second Greg's statement. Solidarity statements are meaningless unless you provide action. If I could just take some of the energy and time spent on wordsmithing solidarity statements into actual actions, I will be a very happy DEI practitioner. So I would say default to action more than statements if you had to. So as long as it's statement plus action, I'm all for it. In fact, not I, talent is. There are so many studies that show that people actually look to see if an organization has done something or has made statements in certain social causes. And that's the kind of organizations they want to work for. With the great resignation that's happening, more and more people are becoming picky about who they join. So it's not really about Greg and my comfort level. Your talent pool is looking for statements and for actions. And they're looking at your org chart. They're looking at your board photos. They're literally doing the homework and seeing, have you made a statement? Have you put your money where your mouth is? Is there actions in it? Is it just one diverse person showing up in every photo opportunity, or is there actual diversity there? All of that. Our talent is becoming savvy consumers of employers, so that they're looking for it. It's almost irrelevant what Greg and I think. The other part is in terms of the question about BRGs, business resource groups, sometimes they're called ERGs, employee resource groups, they're sometimes called affinity groups. All of that aside, it's an ongoing question about, if you have a women affinity group, do you allow men in? And if you do, what role do men play? So it's an ongoing debate and it's an ongoing conversation, which I think is the question that's being asked here. So the first answer is, from a best practice perspective, all employee resource groups should be open to everyone. Why? So that the very people who need to hear the pain is there to hear it, or else you just have an echo chamber. And all employee resource groups should have some money to spend. They should have a budget, not just a group of volunteers. Having said all of that, you also could have separate meetings. And so it is welcome to everyone. All allies are welcome, yes. Having said that, though, there should always be put aside some forums and some opportunities where people could also just talk together. Women, for example, say, yes, it's great to have an employee resource group for women. And yes, I want men to be in the room, but every once in a while, I just want to have a dinner and just talk among ourselves. Fine, absolutely, right? And then the leadership of those employee resource groups, at least at the beginning, should represent the groups that you're supporting, right? Even if it's just optically. If it's an employee resource group for women and the two presidents are men, maybe not the best thing to do. So at least in the beginning, until you really got it down, have the folks who are making decisions be representative of the group that the employee resource group was designed for. So that would be the quick answer, because you have to, you want to grow that talent. What you don't want to have is a white savior complex or a male savior complex, or have allies speak louder than the ones that they're trying to support. So I wanted to just say that. Very quickly, a word about allyship and friendship. Allyship is actually giving people critical mass, not stepping in front of, not speaking louder, but echoing, supporting, reinforcing, standing physically and figuratively with the community that you're trying to support with your allyship. And that's different than friendship. I'll tell you what I mean by that is, so if we're in a meeting and David, you see me constantly getting interrupted, you telling me afterwards, Sue, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's friendship. I value that. But you know what I also really need? Allyship. In the meeting, say, Sue is constantly getting interrupted and I want to hear what she has to say. That is allyship.
100%. Beautiful points. We have a lot of great questions still on deck, but we are out of time, unfortunately. I wanted to thank you both for joining us. Sue, Greg, it's been super enlightening from my perspective. All the people who tuned in, thank you for the great questions as well. If either of you just have a concluding statement you'd like to leave us with, please do, but I do appreciate the fact that we are out of time, and I know you're both very busy. So on behalf of ATAP and Armstrong Craven, thank you, Sue, thank you, Greg. We really appreciate your time and expertise today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me as well. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Just do the work. Do the work is my last statement. Do the work.
Agreed.
Wonderful. Everyone have a great day. Stay healthy. Bye.
Bye.